the crossroads of the Ozarks. Greetings and welcome to PID Radio. I'm Derek Gilbert.
Oh, I'm Sharon Gilbert. What? PID Radio is back? Get out.
After a hiatus of more than 2 years, we have returned.
It's only 2 years?
Yeah, we did a few programs.
Well, we must have been crazy back then because you never know with us. And who knows where we'll go with this. If you are new to listening to our podcasts or watching some of our video presentations, Unraveling Revelations, Sci Friday, things like that, Skywatch TV, which is what brought us to the Ozarks. Derek, you want to tell them exactly what PID Radio is?
PID stands for Peering into Darkness.
Now, why?
And
why do we call it that?
We call it that because we feel it's our mission to look at the world around us and look at what is drawing the attention of our kids, our grandkids, how our culture has been indoctrinated into the literal doctrines of demons that control many of the government agencies, non-government organizations, Hollywood, our mass media, our culture, our news organizations.
We're trying to see the spirits behind the politics. We're trying to look at theopolitics and report back to you
exactly
as
what
good spies in the field
is going on. We're behind enemy lines.
Well, all of us are.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there are many on this field of battle who don't recognize it for what it is. In fact, that was one of the early taglines of PID Radio was "Welcome to the battlefield."
Yeah, exactly. Because believe it or not, you're standing in one. You're born on a battlefield.
Yeah. And that is not a worldview that is really common among our churches these days. I follow the work of researcher George Barna, who now heads up a department at Arizona Christian University, but for many years he's a pollster that specializes in taking the spiritual temperature of American Christians. He uses, let's say, best practices for conducting surveys. He takes a representative sample and really tries to drill down into the data to find out what it means. And again, he finds that we are living in a nation that, although it calls itself Christian, we are a nominally Christian nation. In
some ways, we're post-Christian.
We are, in fact, post-Christian. That was the point. And this goes deeper than just the population of the United States as a whole. It gets right into our churches, as he's surveyed again and again on a regular basis so he can compare over the years how things have changed. The worldviews of our pastors and the people in the pulpits. And this is not intended as a slam at anyone who's called to ministry. It's not intended as a slam at the world around us. It's just a recognition that the enemy, for literally thousands of years, has been feeding us propaganda, and it's difficult to sort out the wheat from the tares, as it were, information from disinformation. And so that is what we do. And it's taken me a while to figure out what exactly that means. There was a period for a few years there where I thought I was supposed to be a discernment minister, criticizing other ministries.
Let's go back to that. You and I met on the internet. For those of you who don't know, Derek and I met through an internet, if you want to call it a dating app or whatever, but it was very early days.
Match.com.
Yeah, Match.com. Yeah. We were one of the first couples that got married on it.
Back in 1997, only 20% of America was even online.
Then, and they probably weren't on that. Well, we met on that and got married, and we've been just happy as a couple of little peas in a pod or clams or whatever.
We are one of the success stories.
And I credit the Lord for that. It has nothing to do with us.
That is
the
correct.
Lord.
Absolutely.
So, in 2002, I've been a writer since probably I was a kid. Now, and you
one
didn't
of the
realize
things I thought most intriguing about you, and when I saw your personal profile at Match.com, was that you were a writer. That and the fact that you were a fan of the Three Stooges.
Three Stooges. Oh yeah, and I watched the X-Files. So there you go. In 2002. You came to me and you said, you know what? I know you love to write. There's a writing challenge. NaNoWriMo, it's National Novel Writing Month. It's now expanded and become just write something. It doesn't have to be a novel. But at the time, you had to write a novel, so it had to be 50,000 words achieved within those 30 days of November. So you and I took up the challenge. I wrote the book. It ended up, I submitted it to a couple of different places, and it was picked up by a couple of publishers, actually. And that got us into the need to, according to the publishers, promote your work. Now, if you're a writer, you know that we writers tend to be very sort of loners, and we don't...
Introverted.
I'm such an introvert, and if you met me, you might not think I am, but trust me, I am. I could spend the rest of my life just in a chair in my head.
During
could you.
Yeah, during the lockdowns, we were like, stay home?
Oh, that's
darn,
awful. Thanks.
Rats. Oh.
So, yes, a couple of the need to promote the books is, I'll go back to that. Got derailed. Originally, our publishers who lived in California, wonderful people, suggested that we have a TV show.
Yeah.
And, okay, you're in California, and probably TV shows are pretty common out there, but not so much here in the heartland. We lived in the St. Louis area, so that was out of our reach.
Right. And this was back in 2002, remember, when 2002, 2003, when the tools for creating video at home were expensive.
And then you had to find a distribution network, some way to get it.
YouTube was still fairly new.
And YouTube was very new. And websites were very, sort of complicated and expensive. And putting video up there, it had to be hosted on your website before YouTube. It got into a mess. So you and I, the podcasting software.
Yeah, and actually, we're fast forwarding now. This is up to about early 2005.
Yeah, sorry about that. Took a while to get it actually published and this and that. So early 2005, late 2004, the publishers said you need to do something. So yes, indeed, we prayed about it because Derek and I we believe the Lord needs to direct our path. He is our shepherd, and we just didn't feel video was the calling. And you came to me and you said, "Hey, guess there's a cool new thing."
Yeah, I'd been researching how we might be able to syndicate or get our views out there, get our marketing out there. We can't do television. That's just beyond our capabilities.
Marketing is just not on our radar. It's okay. We're supposed to do something.
Video cameras at the time were professional quality, so you'd spend thousands and thousands of dollars.
Tens of thousands.
Yeah, I mean, the cost of a decent used car. And we just didn't have those kind of resources. But I'm an old radio guy. I got into broadcasting, as Josh Peck loves to tell people. My first full-time radio gig was when the year he was born. And I was part-time in radio all through college, worked my way through college more or less at various radio stations. So I had an affinity for that and was beginning to feel that itch of wanting to go back to that. But and that led to discovering this new thing called podcasting. The former MTV VJ, Adam Curry, had gotten together with a coder by the name of Dave Weiner, and they'd created the code for syndicating podcasts. This was audio only at the time. Now podcast is a term that's expanded to include vidcasts, which I think is confusing. But, again, I'm still, all right.
We're
I'm still
old and crabby.
raised in the days of radio and broadcast towers and all that.
What?
So we figured out how we could create the MP3 files to make a podcast.
And it was complicated at the time. It wasn't a simple way to create the end product, nor to record it. Right.
And you didn't have companies out there offering their services. Right now we're with Spreaker. We've been with Spreaker for some time. Prior to that, we were using another service. We used Libsyn for a while, Liberated Syndication.
Yeah.
These hosting companies did not exist in 2005. So we had to put it up on our own website and create it.
And we'd run out of space all the time.
Yeah. And we didn't realize after we got a few hundred subscribers how much bandwidth it would take up. And so we blew past our allotted bandwidth with our hosting company. It's been an interesting journey of discovery. I had to learn stuff about creating audio that I knew nothing about from my time in radio. I had no interest.
But the Lord wanted you to know this.
Yes. Yeah, it is true. It's been great training. I knew nothing about microphones or mixing or anything. It's just when I was on the air, Just what button do I push to turn on the mic, and where's the volume control?
Look, we're just talent.
Yeah.
We don't do these things.
I didn't know the difference between kinds of microphones and so forth. So as the podcast grew, because our first episode was, here's why you should buy our books. I don't think
15 minutes long.
Yeah, and I don't think that audio exists anymore.
No,
I don't think we saved it.
No. Well, we wouldn't have. Why do it?
Yeah. And so then it's like, all right, what do we do for the next show? All right, well, let's talk about why we write the kind of stuff we write.
Mm-hmm. And let's interview some people.
And let's interview some people. And that led to this program called PID Radio, Peering into Darkness Radio. And that introduced us to people like Michael Heiser, Tom Horn, L.A. Marzulli, Steve Quayle,
David Flynn, Guy Malone, who will be a guest coming up in a couple of weeks on View from the Bunker. Stan Deyo, Hagman,
Doug Hagman, many others. And so this was back in 2005, 2006, and this program has undergone periods where we recorded it every weekday.
Some days we did it live.
Sometimes we did it
crazy.
live. Yeah, we've kind of gone back and forth, and it's been on hiatus for a while as our time constraints producing video programs over the last 7 years. Sci Friday, now Unraveling Revelation, which is going into its third year, takes up a lot of time.
Yeah,
we've gotten over the years. I've gotten to where producing the audio content, which has helped us produce our weekly Bible study, the Gilbert House Fellowship. It's a 1 hour recording session, and I can have the video rendered and starting to upload to the website and to our app within 30 minutes after we're done. Whereas recording a 30-minute televised program requires several hours of preparation time on the front side and about 4 or 5 hours on the back side.
Plus closed captioning.
That includes the closed captioning now.
Okay.
So found a service that does it on the cheap, which is really, really great.
And the quick.
Yeah, at cheap and quick. But the bottom line is that producing audio takes much, much less time for a variety of reasons. Production is just one aspect of it. But also, when you're producing for video that's being broadcast, like Unraveling Revelation and Sci Friday, which is going on hiatus to facilitate us bringing back this weekly audio, and who knows, where this will lead.
I don't know. We'll talk about that more in a minute.
Sure, but those programs take probably 4 or 5 times more time commitment than producing, and because you're having to slot it into a segment that is exactly 28 minutes and 30 seconds, not 1 second more or less.
Exactly.
Yeah. So for the network, the network has to know that it's exactly the right amount of time so that each program starts exactly at the top or bottom of each hour so people know when to tune in and watch it when it's on the network. That limits what you can say.
Yeah.
And how much time you can say. Okay,
whereas
there's some things you can do.
we can blather as long as we want to.
Right. Now, the only disadvantage is that we don't have visual aids that we can put up on the video. But again,
but that also means that we can do crazy things that they can't see.
Yeah,
we could be doing all sorts of weird stuff while you're watching.
And it means I don't have to shave.
I can fall asleep over here.
Right.
Which I often do.
There is a benefit to that. So anyway, the reason for bringing back PID Radio, and credit again Sharon with another great, all the good ideas from Gilbert House come from Sharon, is that we realized a couple of things. First of all, we're kind of limited in what we can say by the length of time. There are time constraints as to how detailed we can get on some of our topics, but also because of the time it takes to produce. We are a small ministry. It's just us.
It's just the two of us.
Yeah, and there are other things that we want to do. We've got some writing projects that didn't get done in 2022, in part because we were transitioning to becoming our own standalone ministry.
Right.
And in
still
part,
partnering with Skywatch TV.
Still partnering with Skywatch TV.
We're still part of Skywatch TV.
Correct.
It's just that we're trying to sort of butt off from that.
Right.
BUD.
With Tom Horn and Joe Horn's blessing and encouragement, really. Mm-hmm. They've been very gracious in allowing us to just have it. Look, anything you want to offer in your store, even if it's in the Skywatch TV store, we don't undercut what they sell in the Skywatch TV store, but they could very well have said, look, this is a Defender Publishing thing. If anyone wants to buy it, they have to come to us.
They're so generous
they've been very,
with us.
very gracious.
And they've offered us all sorts of equipment, but honestly, we do things
Right.
I like using the iPads and the iPhones to record the video.
Yeah, you'd laugh if you saw our recording studio.
You
It's
would.
2 iPhones and an iPad. Those are our studio cameras.
In a little bedroom that's off our bedroom.
Yeah.
It's like an
But
office.
that's how we feel led to work. In order for us to free up more time to write, I would have to give up editing the video, but that would mean having to farm it out and pay someone a decent wage to take those 4 or 5 hours per episode to edit and then caption.
Exactly. And you are often editing until late at night.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially with Sci Friday, because I feel that program requires a little more visual interest. Unraveling Revelation. I think people who are tuning in for that are very, very interested in that topic. And so we don't need to put as much stuff. I try to, when there's something that requires a map or we make reference to an historic character. Who was Sir Robert Anderson? A little graphic there sort of helps. But with Sci Friday, it just seems like, okay, we need more there. And that requires time. And
you do such a good job with that.
You're
you
very
really,
kind.
really do.
Again, it's been good training. But as we look forward to 2023, I forget what year I'm in, 2023
Welcome to my world.
age, we've got at least one overseas trip. We'll be in Israel in March and early April. And as part of that trip, we're going to shoot a lot of video at some sites. In fact, we're going out early to shoot at some sites ahead of the tour arrival that we can use to produce a video on a subject that we think is really eye-opening and really important and just will help make the Bible, Jesus' ministry, come to life.
Exactly. And we're going to a couple of sites that frankly just aren't touristy at all.
Yeah.
Nobody goes there. But
Right.
we know about them. And so because Aaron Lipkin is such an archaeology nerd,
Yes.
he is taking his drone and he's going with us.
Yeah. And we have to get there before Marzulli.
Well, I know exactly. We're going to get there, and he's
Yes.
going to be there along with Trey Smith.
Right.
Trey Smith is everywhere. He is everywhere.
But the point is that will require a lot of video editing after we get back in April to get that video together, because we'd like to offer it come fall with the book that we're working on,
Yes.
called The Gates of Hell.
Yeah.
So in order to free up time to write and then edit the documentary, and then there'll be the travel video as well.
Right.
Something has to give.
Something has
and
to give. So
Derek's
many-
sleep is not the thing.
No, I want you to
So-
sleep. You need to.
Yeah.
We seriously, and we as human beings, we need a certain amount of just tune out time. Just put
Yeah.
your brain into neutral, listen to music or whatever, and
Right.
stop working for a little
Fantasy
bit.
baseball season comes back in
Oh,
April.
exactly. See, there you go. There
Yeah.
you go. Plus
Mike Heiser's Naked Bible Fantasy Baseball League. And, I made a run for the championship again this year, won it 2 years ago. So we're, gearing up for the 2023 season.
Well, exactly. We also, during the year, we try to go to a few conferences and present.
Yeah.
Plus, we try to go to an archaeological conference in the fall, and we may be going to a couple of other things.
And we
then
may
the
go to Turkey. Right.
Turkey,
3 more
exactly.
weeks out of the country.
Speaking of Turkey, you are blessed. I'm sure you're thinking that right now. Oh, goody. Thanksgiving, and we get the 2 turkeys back talking about turkey.
Yes.
If only.
If
Yeah,
only.
well. So anyway, yes, we are here. And if you are brand new to PID Radio, we have archives going all the way back to March of 2005.
Mm-hmm.
And you can listen to all sorts of great interviews. Some of the people on those interviews are no longer with us.
Right.
So their information is really even more valuable to me because it's archived there.
Mm-hmm.
You and I love to talk about theopolitics, which are the spirits behind geopolitics. You get to talk a little bit about that on your 5 and 10 that you do for Skywatch TV, but you're limited by
Again,
the very name,
right.
5 and 10.
Try to keep it short so that people
Supposed
can
to
make
be-
a daily habit
Yeah,
of
it's
watching it. And that
usually 5 and 15 or 20, and maybe 5-ish. But the fact is that you're trying to give it concise.
keep it concise.
But we can blather on and on. And Derek and I talk all day long about what's going on in the world and the
Right.
spirits behind it. Well, just right off the top of my head, there are tons of things going on in Eastern Europe. And many of you have been following them since February 24th of this year. But before that, it was being telegraphed by the West.
Yeah, it was. And it
We're talking about the Russian invasion of
Ukraine. Yeah. And this is something that has been pushed for a long time. when the Soviet Union broke down and Ukraine was in possession of some of Russia's nuclear arsenal, one of the deals that was made with the United States and the West, which NATO basically, which is essentially a subsidiary of United States Co., if you will, Ukraine was persuaded to give back those weapons so that suddenly there wasn't another nuclear-armed independent power on planet Earth.
Give back to
Russia. So that with the understanding that NATO would not expand any further east. Okay, so Russia was willing to accept this deal. Ukraine, they were willing to persuade Ukraine to do this. There were some concessions that were made. But one of the concessions made by the West was that NATO would not expand any further east than where it was at the time. And since then, the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, have been added to NATO. And NATO and the West have been pushing to include Ukraine, Georgia, which is on Russia's southern border, and now you've got Finland and Sweden that have requested admission, and that would add like 900 miles to the border. If I remember, 900 miles or 900 kilometers, I forget the distance. But anyway, more states bordering on Russia added to this Western alliance, and Russia, when it complained, essentially was told by Western diplomats, "Well, you should have got it in writing." Like, okay, so now I'm not trying to defend or justify what Putin did in February with the invasion, but
there's blame on both sides.
There's blame on both sides. It's like how we reacted in 1962 when Khrushchev wanted to put nuclear missiles in Cuba. Now, of course, what we in the West forget was this was in response to NATO putting nuclear missiles in Turkey.
Well, it's been a one-upmanship for millennia. And this is because the spirits behind the scenes are at war with one another.
And that's what I'm leading to. Just a little bit of geopolitical background before we touch on get into the theopolitics.
Well, but getting back to the geopolitical, so people understand, there were a lot of Russians still living in modern-day Ukraine,
Correct.
Lithuania, all of those Baltic states and the Eastern European states. So the Russians, some of them wanted to still be part of Russia.
Right. And that defines modern-day Ukraine. You look at the nation state of Ukraine, and we tend to look at these nation states as, okay, that is one unified political bloc.
But no,
Ukraine is just as divided, if not more so, than we are here in the United States. I mean, here in the heartland, we look at people who live on the coast, like New York City, L.A., San Francisco, San Diego, Portland, Seattle, those real liberal enclaves, and we just can't figure out how people in those areas live any better than they can understand how people here in the Ozarks live the way we do. That's what's going on in Ukraine, if not more so. When you look at the most recent elections there, 2014 and the Orange Revolution and then the Maidan Revolution here a couple of years ago, the most recent elections there, when Yanukovych was elected and then thrown out for Porovich.
No. Oh, that's right.
Porovich, who was then succeeded by Zelensky. The regions in the east, the Donbass regions, voted overwhelmingly for Yushchenko, who was the Russian-backed candidate, whereas the western regions, which are more Polish and Ukrainian, voted for the pro-Western candidate. And, of course, Yushchenko was run out of office basically by a coup that was backed by the United States in the West.
It was similar to the rebellion in France. I mean, there were barricades and fires and gunfire and protest after protest. And a lot of people died.
So that's what's going on. The West backed a coup that overthrew the administration of the Russian-backed president of Ukraine a few years ago.
Now, again, in order to understand this, don't think when you hear the West, don't think that's the United States. The West is a really strange conglomerate sort of almost a keyword, a code word. But think the spirits behind it.
Right.
The spirits behind it are putting tribal against tribe nation.
Yes.
And within the tribes, you'll have various clans.
Factions within the tribes.
Exactly, right. Because each one, and sometimes it comes down to family units. Mm-hmm. And you and I write a lot about this. It's why we started out trying to promote Winds of Evil, mm-hmm. which was my first novel. We started out trying to promote that and other things that we were doing together. And then after one show, we said no. We ended up, sort of reporting on swine flu and things like that, mm-hmm. trying to look at what was going on in the world. Well, spiritually speaking, you and I, since then, the Lord has taken us along a very interesting path that has taught us a lot about context, which is why we want to put not only the geopolitics of today, the newspaper headlines, in true context of history, but also to put it in context of theopolitics and go back to the Bible and mm-hmm. back to ancient times, even before Moses and Abraham, and go back to the very earliest days of Genesis and try to figure out how did this spiritual war get started, and why are we born on a battlefield? That's what PID radio is all about.
Mm-hmm. But that's really the only way to make sense of some of these things that are happening mm-hmm. out there, because we look at the situation in Ukraine and how crazy it is mm-hmm. that we here in the United States, what was the most recent number I saw for the amount of military aid we sent to Ukraine? Something like...
it's crazy.
I'll have to look that up, but it's in the tens of billions of dollars, which is nuts. Because
I want to say 60 or something.
I think that sounds right. It's far more than we've spent. We've spent far more in the 9 months of that ongoing conflict than we spent in... Oh, gosh, that's like 60% of what we spent for the total 20 years in Afghanistan.
Gosh.
The Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction, or SIGAR as the acronym, just released a report last week and called it a $145 billion epic, colossal, predestined failure.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. I think it's something like $60 billion that we've spent in Ukraine so far, or committed to anyway.
Well, it's hard to say. I'm seeing $16 billion, but that's from back in September, and we've sent a lot more since then. And
then when you include the rest of the West, tanks, refurbished T-72, Soviet T-72 tanks that Hungary and other nations are helping to provide, it really is senseless when we consider that, regardless, again, setting aside whether or not Putin is right or Zelensky is right, because I know that there are people who feel very strongly on both sides. Ukraine is doing God's work. Putin is doing whatever. Just set all that aside. Just look in terms of the raw, naked, objective geopolitics. Ukraine is on Russia's border. Russia was invaded twice in the 20th century, World War I, World War II, through Ukraine. Mm-hmm. So you can see they might be a little sensitive about that. And here they've got it
goes back to the 19th century.
Well, it goes back much farther than that.
Crimean War and Napoleonic Wars.
Right. I mean, the Crimean War, where the Russians were fighting a coalition of Western nations allied with the Ottoman Turks.
Exactly.
Because the Germans and the French and the British didn't want the Russians to gain any ground.
No, they didn't.
Great game.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that were really, So the great game is what it was called.
But when you look at it from a standpoint of how would we in America react if, for example, China came in and overthrew the elected president, head of state of Mexico, and imposed a guy who was friendly to Beijing? We probably wouldn't like it very much.
No, we
especially
wouldn't.
If they started doing deals and putting Chinese weapons on our southern border. We might be inclined to put a stop to that by any means necessary. So this is what's going on. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. We have love the Ukrainian people.
Calm down now.
Yeah.
Have some fruit. Have some fruit. Because the bottom line is, we will talk about these things.
Yes.
It is spiritual, but the bottom line is it's still in God's hand.
Right. And the one thing, and this is why I get frustrated by this, because the one thing that we can agree on, regardless of who's responsible in the natural realm, number one, it is a spiritual thing. Number two, people in the natural realm, the Ukrainian people, are suffering and dying because of this.
They really are.
They are looking at a very cold, dark winter because of what's going on, and because the West has determined that the West will fight to the last Ukrainian.
Well,
we're not. Yeah, no.
It's obvious what's going on in Ukraine as far as, yes, much of their infrastructure has been taken out. Their power generation capability has been taken out. There are a lot of things that take place there that are going to affect the rest of the world. They're going to ripple into your home and ours. The economy has shifted a great deal. Now, prior to all of this, and Derek and I occasionally will put on our tinfoil hats, but the bottom line is, even though we're wearing that hat, we know whose hand actually guides the world, whose hand holds the world, who holds all things together, who made the aluminum that goes into the tinfoil hat. So, rest in the Lord.
Yeah.
Wait patiently for him, and he shall give thee your heart's desire. And that heart's desire is to see Christ come back, to see him sitting on that throne in Jerusalem. And those of us who know Bible prophecy and look forward to that day, yet we will complain when we see it playing out before our very eyes.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It is... That's human nature.
It is human nature. So we're going into some troubling times. It's that old, Jesus is coming soon. Troublesome times are here.
Yeah.
Leading men's hearts to fear. I love that song.
Yeah. But there is good news. We'll talk more about some of the economic things coming up. I want to touch on the economy as we head into the holiday season here. But we'll close on good news as we always do. But we want to give you just let you know we've got some specials coming up in our store.
Oh,
and
is this the time for the commercial?
This is the time for the commercial.
Be sure to drink
your Ovaltine.
It's a crummy commercial.
More PID radio straight ahead. Spiritual warfare is where the rubber meets the road for us as Christians, but often we treat it as though it doesn't really exist. Well, during the month of November, we're tackling this subject head on as we celebrate the release of Sharon's new novel, The Poisoned Pawn, Book 8 in the Red Wing Saga, a series that teaches spiritual warfare through compelling stories featuring characters that you come to know and love. As part of this special package, we're offering the important new book by our friend Vicki Joy Anderson, They Only Come Out at Night, where she looks at the phenomenon of night terrors or sleep paralysis, examines what the medical community says about it, and then digs into the spiritual forces behind it. And the good news, that there is a way to make it stop. We're also offering our 2-disc DVD set, Unmasking the Ancient Gods, a series of presentations on spiritual warfare, everything from the UFO phenomenon to Jack the Ripper and spiritual warfare in the 19th century, which is really where the storyline of the Red Wing Saga begins. Bought separately, this package is worth $65, but it's yours for just $35 plus shipping and handling during the month of November only. Our spiritual warfare special offer, available only at our online store, gilberthouse.org/store. And as always, we thank you for your prayers and your support. Welcome back to PID Radio. I'm Derek Gilbert.
I am Sharon Gilbert. We are so delighted that we get to do this program again and again. As you listened early on, it's something that gives us more time to write. But it's more than that. Derek and I feel this sort of quickening in our spirit that says you're running out of time. Yeah, we're getting older, so technically speaking, he and I have fewer days left upon this earth. But I just have the sense that Jesus' coming is so, so close. And because of that, we have to we have to redeem the time, make the best use of your time. And so we want to try to minister as much as possible. And it's a little tougher to do when it takes so much post-production on just a 28:30 show.
Yeah. So this program, you get twice as much time, more content, more depth on the content, and we're able to turn it around much more quickly, which means we can do this in almost real time.
2 turkeys with leftovers.
That's it. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
That's the title for the program. You've just come up with the title for the program. Well, this past week, and this is kind of fun too, is that I get to do show prep all week long for the 5 and 10 program, just to roll this into what we talk about.
That's what we do all morning, every morning. Prep for your show.
home sale reports from the National Association of Realtors came out, and the October home sales were down year over year, which is the only way you can really measure it because there are seasonal variations in sales, certain times of the year where sales are higher than others. People try, especially if you've got kids, you try to move in the summer months when they're not in the middle of the school year.
Right.
But year over year gives you a view of how home sales are going. And home sales dropped in October 28.4% over 2021.
That's kind of surprising because 2021, we were just coming back from the lockdown.
Right.
And so I would have thought that that would still be kind of slow.
Correct. And it's probably a combination of several things. The slowing economy, mortgage interest rates are rising as the Federal Reserve Bank, central banks around the world are trying to get a handle on inflation. So you've got inflation rising, which is cutting into home budgets anyway. Mortgages are less affordable now because the interest rates are going up.
They're going down a little bit.
Just the last few days. But in October, this wasn't.
Right.
They
True.
had
Yeah,
not
they
peaked
were
yet.
high then.
Yeah, it hit 7%, although I'm old enough to remember my brief stint in real estate where I was good enough at it. I was Rookie of the Year for my real estate office in St. Louis. Yeah, back in, what was it, in 2001? Or no, it would be about 91, I think. Anyway.
Before we met.
Yeah. But I remember the people in the office, the realtors, celebrating when rates got down to 7%.
Oh, my.
Because they'd been higher than that all through the 80s, coming down after the inflation of the early 1980s. So 40 years ago, inflation was really high, and the Federal Reserve, to try to corral inflation, raised its prime lending rate to 18% or something like that. It was crazy high.
It was crazy high, and you figure that your local bank is going to lend, or your mortgage is going to lend higher than the prime.
Right. So things had gotten back up to that point. It dropped just a little bit over the past week. But again, this drop in October of 28% was the largest decline year over year since the subprime mortgage meltdown in 2008. I mean, taking out the month or two when the economy just went on a total halt in 2020, March and April. This is not a good indicator because home sales, existing home sales, new home sales, a big part of the U.S. economy. So it's just another indicator that the economy is probably going into recession. In fact, technically, it already met the criteria for recession earlier this year with two successive quarters of declining gross domestic product. Now, of course, the experts trying to prop up
What product?
Yeah,
We hardly produce anything anymore.
Yeah. Trying to prop up the regime in the White House ahead of the midterms. No, that's not what a recession is. Was traditional definition of recession is 2 consecutive quarters of declining GDP,
Which is exactly what we had.
until we had it, and then it's like, no, that's not what that was at all.
Brand new.
Well, so just be prepared. I mean, we've survived worse in this country. The meltdown in 2008 and 9 was worse. The recession of the early 80s probably worse than what we're going into. It's just that we've got too many years of central banks pushing artificially low interest rates in order to increase the amount of money in circulation, giving us the illusion of wealth, which is all based on an inverted pyramid of credit,
It's a
of
pyramid
debt.
scheme. Exactly. Yeah. And when you have more money in circulation, inflation rises.
Yeah.
You get your dollar is worth less.
Right.
Which makes home prices more.
Right.
Food more, gas more.
College loans. I mean, this is why outstanding student loan debt is $1.75 trillion. I checked that yesterday. When we wrote the book Giants, Gods, and Dragons back in 2020, it was at $1.54 trillion. It's now $1.75 trillion.
Well, part of the reason for that is because of the so-called grace.
Right.
You can actually go for a long time, and when lockdown happened, okay, we'll just go ahead and put your payments on hiatus, but the payments continued to accrue interest.
Yeah.
And it is compound.
So you've got students out there coming out of college with an average debt load of about $35,000 now. It's maybe even a little higher. That's what it was when we wrote the book.
If it's a graduate school, it's even more.
Sure. But all across the board, your typical college student coming out of school today, $35,000 in debt.
That's a lot.
It is. And on average, it takes a college student 21 years to pay it off, assuming they make the minimum payments. So they're already into their 40s before they get those debts. The average monthly payment is like $400 a month, which really affects the ability of these students to come out and buy a home. Now, the president has extended the grace period again. It's not clear that he has the constitutional authority to do it. I would argue that he doesn't. I see both sides of the issue. I understand we've hamstrung entire generations of college graduates.
And I also understand those who have paid them off or who are paying them off, that they get angry that somebody else gets a deal.
Or those who never went to college and decided instead to make a career as a machinist or as a plumber or an HVAC technician, where you can make a really good living without requiring that kind of debt.
Exactly.
So
college
you can understand.
Is sort of a scam.
And the thing is,
I love my degree. I love what I got to learn. But
it is a diploma factory. It
really
is an
is.
industry. It would, I can see the idea of the grace period of student loan forgiveness. And I can see that there might be some benefit to that, to the society as a whole, except that it really wouldn't be forgiveness. Those banks are just not going to write off the $1.75 trillion.
No, they're not. Somebody's going to pay for that.
Federal government is just going to print a bunch more money and put taxpayers on the hook
which
for it.
Which means your dollar is worth even less.
Worth even less. So anyway, bottom line, though, is this. We've got an everything bubble out there. Assets, stocks, and bonds are overpriced.
Bubble.
It's an everything bubble. Yeah, I've seen that term by economists.
Two turkeys and an everything bubble. There you go.
That needs to deflate to bring the prices of assets, real estate, stocks, and bonds back down to a normal level.
And Klaus Schwab has a giant pen, and he's bringing over ready to do that.
Well, and that's the thing. And that leads to the next point. Is this all being deliberately manipulated to create the conditions where people will demand the Great Reset?
Demand a jubilee.
This is why God declared that every 7 years all debts would be forgiven, so that we wouldn't become debt slaves with 30-year mortgages and 7-year auto loans and 21-year student loans where we're constantly paying. And you're George Jetson on that treadmill. Jane, get me off this crazy thing. Because when it comes to student loan debt, you can't discharge that through a bankruptcy.
No, you
can
cannot.
get rid of the other stuff, but your student loan just sits there and waits, growing larger and larger, like Jabba the Hutt, ready to swallow you up.
Pizza the Hut.
Yeah, yes. So is the FTX cryptocurrency exchange implosion a $36 billion fraud scheme, apparently?
Where did that guy come from?
That is a really good question. I'm going to be talking with Guy Malone about that. He is now a Bitcoin advisor. He's actually an editor for Bitcoin Magazine now.
Is he?
Yeah, that's what he does in his day job. So we'll be discussing that for an upcoming episode of View from the Bunker. But I'm doing some reading on this whole Ponzi scheme that is FTX. We are not fans of cryptocurrencies, of things like blockchain based currencies.
I like things that actually you can use.
Yeah,
things that are real, not bits and bytes.
Fiat currency has its own issues. The only thing supporting the value of the dollar, the Federal Reserve note, is the faith and credit, full faith and credit of the United States government.
Right, but think about it. You're handing over your own money, and some people are mortgaging their homes to do this. Handing over real money that you can go and buy, food with, for imaginary money that you're told will grow. And yes, Bitcoin has grown a lot since it originated. But in the meantime, others are coming along, taking your money and running.
Yeah, and that's what FTX did in its trading arm, Alameda Research. The difference between, and I've seen some people put it this way, the difference between Bitcoin and some of these crypto exchanges like FTX and Binance is another one. Not that Binance is a scam or anything like that. I'm not trying to
Well, I think Binance
them.
had something to do with taking them down.
He did, yes. They were rivals. Bitcoin is decentralized. The nodes that process the transactions and verify and validate the transactions are...
So it takes a long time.
It's a decentralized network, so it takes a while. But the point is that no one person has control over what the network is doing. So Bitcoin is out of the control of central banks. And the exchanges like FTX, Binance, and others have a CEO. And what some traders have said, look, if you're sending your cryptocurrency to a company that's got a CEO, you've already eliminated the one advantage that Bitcoin has over these cryptocurrencies. So that's a problem in and of itself. But the governments now are stepping in, or rather, the bankers behind the governments of the world are stepping in. The New York Fed just announced this past week it is launching a 12-week trial of a central bank digital currency. And Guy and I have talked about this in the past. CBDCs eliminate the advantages of cryptocurrencies anyway. What's happening is we're being conditioned to accept digital bits and bytes. In fact, we already do.
I know.
What's in your wallet?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. We just pay with imaginary money.
We use debit cards to
as
trade
long as
money
I
back
can
and
get
forth.
an actual, some beans or rice or something that is tangible in exchange for the imaginary money that you say is worth something, then I'm happy.
Right.
That's why I don't like to have a whole lot of imaginary money.
Direct deposits are just putting Social Security payments or paychecks right in IRS refunds right into our bank accounts.
Vanish at any time.
Yeah. How do we know we have that money? We don't actually go to the bank and look in the vault and say, okay, that stack over there, that's yours. And that stack over there, because they don't have to keep 100% of the money in reserve, only 10% fractional banking.
Yeah.
So, and China, by the way, just as a sign of how China's economy is doing, they've just lowered the fractional reserve requirement to 7.5% for their banks.
Well, I'll tell you what, since we're talking about banking, how about if we go into the spiritual direction on this? This is something you've been researching for a number of our projects. So tell me a bit, is there a spirit? Because I've talked about Inanna a lot, who I believe is the whore riding the beast. She controls a lot of things historically, if you go back into antiquity and see what this so-called goddess was up to. And I think she's still running. She's very much running the world today. But economically, financially, is there a god or goddess in charge of that?
Yeah, this was one of the really interesting bits of research that we came across in our study for Giants, Gods, and Dragons, as we were trying to identify the four horsemen of the apocalypse. The rider on the black horse, who's usually in our English translations, he's depicted or he's described as carrying scales, which, okay, that's weights and measures and unfair weights and measures. Okay, fine. But the word in Greek, zugos, actually means yoke. He's not carrying scales, he's carrying a yoke, which is what you put on the neck of an ox.
Exactly.
To hitch him to the plow. And the point there is that you want that this entity, the rider on the black horse, is trying to drag us all into a system of economic servitude, which gets back to what I was saying before. Credit card debt, student loans, auto loans, mortgage loans, getting us into a system of debt servitude.
I'm showing Derek a graphic, which is the logo for the Law of the Sea Treaty.
Oh, okay. Law of the Sea. It's got scales on it. Very interesting.
Yes.
Good catch
and
there.
that gets into some really weirdness because the sea itself is an entity. So if the sea is governing the way countries have to behave with one another, then essentially this is a world order run by Yam, run by chaos.
Yeah.
But using certain subsidiary gods in their pantheon,
Right.
to take care of these things, like in your case, Nabu.
And we've argued that Chaos, Leviathan, also connected to the sea, the dragon that is in the sea,
Yes.
is, we believe, the spirit that will indwell the human that will be known as the Antichrist.
Exactly. And in case you think that I am sort of overstepping here, but the Law of the Sea Treaty, I don't think the United States ever signed it, but the Law of the Sea Treaty, or LOST, seriously, that's the acronym, it was signed by most of the countries in the UN. And it was signed indeed by Italy and France, and apparently they're sparring with one another right now over the ocean. Gosh, what was it called? It was a ship that had 238 immigrants on board, that they were rescued by this ship and brought on. And Italy didn't want to take them, even though it was in Italian waters. So France challenged them and said, you are not fulfilling your duties with regards to the law of the sea.
Interesting.
France took them on.
Yeah, and certain agreements inside the European Union.
Well, I would say to France, look, if you're going to talk about the law of the sea, then how about the fact that you told England you would be happy to help them with that immigration problem that they are dealing with? The thousands and thousands who have made it across the channel from France, and many of them are Albanian.
Yeah, that's kind of a weird thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a whole trafficking thing going on TikTok.
Yeah.
There are Albanian traffickers that will say 100,000% guaranteed great crossing. And it shows a little image of all these guys at a rubber boat just waving.
With some really, catchy theme music behind it. They're actually running commercials
seriously
on TikTok to tell Albanians they can, make it to, if they can make it to France, they can get over to England, and England will take them in. The UK will take them in.
That's what they're told.
Well, the same thing is happening here. We got Venezuelan migrants coming across.
And these migrants, they pay.
And they do. They pay a lot.
If they don't have the money to pay and they can't, then
well, there was a story last year where a large percentage of those who were coming across the southern border here into the United States had come from where was it? Was it Ghana?
Oh yes, that's right.
I'm forgetting which nation it was, but somehow and the media, which has been very sympathetic to them, talked about how they had walked, made the long walk through the dangerous Darien Gap between Colombia and Venezuela. The question, how did they get across the Atlantic Ocean? Well, they flew into Bogota. Wait. Or they flew into Rio.
A lot of the Albanians are flying into France.
Yeah. So if they can afford to fly there, why didn't they just fly into Luton or Heathrow? Or why didn't they fly directly into
Come in the
Houston?
legal way.
Right. It's because
they'll get turned back.
They get turned back. You show up at an airport and they... Okay, no, you don't have a visa? All right, well...
No, we're not going to give you a visa.
Stay here.
Yeah, exactly.
You're getting back on that plane.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what's going on. Now, we understand the desire to do something to improve your lot in life. Mm-hmm. Our ancestors came here for that very reason.
Exactly.
I mean, had it not been for my ancestors on my mother's side deciding to get out of Europe at the time, they'd be in either in Ukraine or they'd be in Germany. It's likely that during the 30s, when Stalin and Hitler were swapping people back and forth, they probably would have been sent back to Germany. But that wouldn't have been a good place to be during World War II either. So it was because they were willing to take a chance and do what was necessary legally to emigrate. And, my dad's side of the family, we had folks that came back in the 17th century, not among the, they weren't among the first boatload. These were like guys who came over as indentured servants and stuff, but they did it that way because they wanted to make a better life for themselves and for their posterity. So I get that. I understand, Venezuela, not a place I'd want to live today. Honduras, Guatemala, tough. It is really tough, but part of those issues are the result of those running those nations and the way they're being exploited, or the fact that they're willing to work with their more powerful neighbors in the United States. It's a process Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis calls elite capture. You get a wealthy patron from outside your nation willing to pay you to work against the best interests of your people. We see that here in the United States with those who are willing to work with China, the so-called 1,000 Talents Plan.
Yes.
But also people like...
we all do it.
Yeah.
We all do it. But
it's gone on for years and years. The Romans did it with the Celts and the Germans and so forth. Getting back to
the idea that nations have to make treaties with one another, Law of the Sea Treaty being one of them. There's so many treaties in this world that form this nexus, this network of rules. That is the yoke, because it all comes down to money. Mm-hmm. And who controls it. And war is money.
It is.
It's a money-making business.
Yeah. In fact, some of the European Union nations now are beginning to complain that the United States is taking advantage of the situation in Ukraine to profit And to which our response is, duh. The Nord Stream pipelines that were sabotaged.
The Nord Stream 1.
Nord Stream 1 and 2 were both
2
blown.
was also blown up?
Yeah, they were both blown.
I knew that it had never actually been turned on.
Right.
2.
It will never be turned on now because it's got a big hole in it, and seawater's inside those steel pipes eating them away.
Yeah.
So
they'll have to lay all new pipe.
Assuming that ever gets done again.
Yeah.
There are some who believe that this was the work of Western interests who wanted to, and specifically American or North American industrial interests.
Well, that's what's in all the Russian papers, that the West did it.
Yeah, but I mean specifically within the West. This is a fracturing of the Western coalition.
Oh.
That the Germans were getting wobbly because German industrialists, who tend to be more nationalistic than American industrialists, were growing in power and influence. German industrialists may, in fact, kind of tell the Scholz government what to do. They really benefited from cheap Russian energy and also cheap French energy. The French have a bunch of nuclear plants.
Oh, you remember that photo op between Merkel and Putin years back when they signed the deal for the Nord Stream 2?
It was mutually beneficial. It gave German industry a cheap source of energy, and it benefited Russia, of course. This was not seen as a good thing necessarily by American industrialists who want to maintain their hold as basically the world's number one influencer. So it's possible. Yeah. Influencer, not in the TikTok sense.
That's what I was picturing.
Yeah. But so whether this is true or not, I don't know. But some Europeans are beginning to feel this way. And in fact, Olaf Scholz, Germany's chancellor went to China and had a meeting with Xi Jinping. And there are some who believe that this was at the behest of German industrialists who are saying, look, we see which way the wind is blowing here. And the Americans don't have the clout that they think they do. There's a fundamental difference, and I think this helps understand the way the world is kind of splitting and fracturing. The globalists like Klaus Schwab think that they're going to have it all under their control. You've got a fracture where you've got the U.S. and NATO on one side, and you've got BRICS plus, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, with new additions, Saudi Arabia, possibly.
South Africa's part of that?
Yeah, South Africa's, yes. Saudi Arabia, Venezuela perhaps, possibly Iran at some point, joining. Why is that significant? Well, because just in India and China, you've got 60% of the world's population right there. And when you've got Saudi Arabia and Russia on the same side, assuming the Saudis become a member of this group, you've got a big chunk of the world's hydrocarbons, oil and natural gas.
Yes. Those countries that are actually willing to, dig for it. And
in Russia, China, and India, you've got economies that are based on industrial capitalism, which is what the UK and the United States and Western Europe used to have,
right?
Which is what made us wealthy. But now our nations, the UK, United States, so the city, London, Bank of England, Federal Reserve Bank, and those who profit from what they do, focused on financial capitalism. We don't really build anything anymore. We don't invest in making things, growing things, or whatever. We just invest in other investments.
We just take selfies.
In other words, cryptocurrencies, but we collateralize debt. They'll take mortgage loans, package them up, and sell them as an investment.
They will take your life insurance policy. They will take anything. It's like the Star Trek episode where they're betting Quatloos on, I think it's Triskelion is the name of the planet they're on. And they have to fight one another. And these, brains in jars, they bet, Quatloos.
And we wrote about this in Giant Skies and Dragons, the chapter I wrote about the rider on the black horse, Nabu, wrote about this and how we're seeing conditions that are similar to what led up to the Great Depression of the 1930s. Because what really led to the meltdown in 1929 were the lack of firewalls between investment banks and commercial banks.
Mm-hmm.
Investment banks don't or weren't allowed to accept deposits or issue notes. Commercial banks would take deposits and pay interest on those deposits. But there were banks that were raiding their commercial side to finance their speculative investments. And
that still goes on.
Well, it goes on again. And this was, again, I detailed this in the book. In 1933, the Glass-Steagall Act no longer allowed commercial banks and investment banks to operate with no internal separation. But in 1999, Glass-Steagall was partly repealed by a bill called the Graham-Leach-Billy Act, or GLBA, which passed with bipartisan support, not surprisingly. Whenever something passes Congress with bipartisan support, the fix is in.
Oh, yeah.
And so you now have, for example, J.P. Morgan in 2000 merging with Chase Manhattan. So now it's J.P. Morgan Chase. So you've got commercial bank and investment bank together. Goldman Sachs has launched its own online bank called Marcus.
Oh, yes. There are a lot of things you can do now and just call yourself a bank.
Exactly. And essentially what those banks are doing is just a less egregious form of, and for all I know, they're doing things totally on the up and up. I'm not saying anything otherwise.
One can hope they are.
One can hope they are. But that's what brought down FTX and Alameda. You had the investment side, Alameda, and you had the banking side, essentially, FTX, and one raiding the other. And as of the time we wrote the book, Giants, Gods, and Dragons, 2 years ago, the value of the global market for financial derivatives, investing in other investments, was $560 trillion. That is like 8 or 7 times more than the combined gross domestic product of every nation in the world at the time. The GDP for the United States is about 21 trillion. To give you an idea.
Theoretical GDP.
Theoretical. Yeah, I know. I still can't figure out why government spending counts as gross domestic product.
All that money, the helicopter money, hey, GDP.
Right. But anyway, you got an inverted pyramid of debt. 560 trillion in debt. And now that interest rates are going up, you're going to see people not able to make their margin
Eventually,
calls.
that pyramid that is upside down will crash.
But that's the rider on the black horse. That is financial slavery, and that's what they're trying to accomplish.
Because we're coming up on an hour or so, wind this up with something good.
Well, the good news is that we were given all of this information in advance 2,000 years ago.
I was hoping you would go there.
God revealed this to John the Revelator almost 2,000 years ago.
He saw it, and can you imagine what it was like to see all that?
John, well, yeah, he had to be. I would have to wonder if it were me. Am I going crazy here? Why am I seeing these things? Why am I hallucinating? I'm an old man. I'm
seeing these creatures.
Right.
But he lived in a context where and we'll talk about this next time on PID Radio, but he lived in a context where he sort of had an idea of what those were. He
did, and he also had the benefit of having walked with and learned directly from the Messiah. So, and he saw those miracles. So he was probably a little more open to supernatural experiences than most of us in the modern world.
So much more.
He also saw the good news.
Yes, that's
he saw the happy ending.
Yes.
Now, sadly, there are many around us who will not accept.
Have a happy ending.
Yeah, who will not accept the gospel, just the very simple gospel, according to the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15. Just believe that Jesus died for your sins in accordance with the Scriptures, and that in accordance with the Scriptures, he rose again on the third day. That's the gospel by which we are saved. John saw all that good news. So God is not...
He hasn't left the building.
He hasn't left the building. He's not... None of this is shouldn't catch us by surprise. It's certainly not catching him by surprise. And I love the fact that you keep referring back to Psalm 2, which is God looking down from his throne in heaven and laughing with derision at these people. So we can look at these globalists. We can look at Klaus Schwab, who's, Bond central casting villain, and think, oh, he's really scary. No, he's not. God is laughing at him.
You should take a look. If you're not familiar with Psalm 2, it's wonderful. Why do the nations rage and imagine a vain thing?
It is...
The nations, this is think of United Nations, and they're imagining a vain thing.
It is really encouraging. In fact, let me bring
the
it up
New
here.
World Order is a vain thing. The whole idea of Nabu reigning, this is not just the humans. These are the spirits behind them.
Psalm 2, why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain?
Yes.
The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against Yahweh and against his anointed.
Now, rulers isn't only the human rulers. These are also the archons and the principalities.
That is correct. They take counsel together against Yahweh and against his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. Verse 4, this is the money quote.
I love it.
He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, as for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Is how this all plays out.
That is the good news right there.
There are so many in this world who look at the state of things and despair because they don't have this blessed assurance, this blessed hope that the Lord has promised he is coming back and he will restore justice to this world.
Amen to that.
So,
by the way, we've neglected to mention our opening music. That was just a little tease from Casper McLeod.
I mentioned it in the closing.
Oh, did you? Well, good.
I will mention it in the closing.
It is so good. He's a genius.
He is. Loved him.
And he wrote a song about you. All about asking
made up
you
on the spot,
the time, and he'll
tell you how to build a watch. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, we are out of time, speaking of that. But we will come back and do more of this because it's something that we love doing.
Amen. So, subscribe at pidradio.com. There's a place there to do just that. You can also, the easy way to do it is just get our app, pidradio.app or gilberthouse.org/app.
pidradio.app.
pidradio.com/app. Thank you. Or gilberthouse.org/app. And you can get all of our content there. This podcast, if you just subscribe through podcast, we're also at Apple Podcast, Google Podcast. You've got the Gilbert House channel at Apple Podcasts.
It's a two-turkey takeover.
Yes, it is.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to cut that out.
They won't know what I'm laughing at if you cut that out.
Until next time, I'm Derek Gilbert.
I'm Sharon Gilbert. Bye-bye, everybody.
PID Radio is an outreach of Gilbert House Ministries, released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Follow us online, pidradio.com, Twitter @PID Radio, or by downloading our free app, pidradio.com/app or gilberthouse.org/app. Our theme is Adoration by Casper McLeod, CasperMcLeodMusic.com. Join us each week or at our app for our Bible study, The Gilbert House Fellowship.